The wind carried the smell of scorched creosote and sun-baked timber, drifting low over the town like a ghost with nowhere left to haunt. Down the main street of La Verdad, dust clung to windows and boots, thick as old regrets. A sun-bleached banner for the county fair fluttered on a single nail, its other corners torn away by storms no one remembered clearly. In front of the livery, a horse shifted in the shade, swatting flies with a tail too tired to care. On the edge of that stillness stood Caleb Rourke, shoulders hunched like a man bracing for a blow that would never stop coming. His coat hung heavy with old sweat and salt from desert crossings, and his hat did little to shield him from the fire in the sky. One hand gripped the saddle horn of his bay gelding, the other clutched a boy too small and too silent for his age. The boy had skin the color of red clay and eyes like smoke after fire. He didn't cry. He didn't look around. He stared straight ahead at nothing, as if the world beyond Caleb's side had ceased to exist. They had buried the boy's mother 3 days ago under a cracked cottonwood tree, halfway between the reservation and the empty canyon where her bones would never be visited again. The ground was too hard to dig deep, and Caleb's palms were still raw from the shovel. He had said nothing at the burial, no prayers, no eulogy, just a nod to the wind and a promise he didn't know how to keep. Now he stood with the child, his child, though no court or preacher had blessed it before the town that once praised him as a scout, a tracker, a soldier, and now looked through him like heat haze. A few women paused at the general store, whispering behind gloved hands. Old Boone at the saloon porch spat into the dirt and muttered, "Took in a stray, huh?" loud enough for the others to hear. Caleb didn't answer. He didn't flinch. Just lifted the boy off the saddle and set him on the ground. The child swayed for a moment, then steadied, small boots kicking up puffs of dust. He kept close to Caleb's leg, not out of fear, no. This child had already seen worse than what fear could offer, but out of instinct. Like a colt who knew which scent meant safety. The sheriff didn't come out to greet them, nor did Reverend Holden. Caleb had known better than to expect open arms. His kind of decision didn't come with congratulations. At the edge of town, the abandoned line shack still leaned into the wind like a drunk, and that's where he took the boy. The inside smelled of mice and disuse. He opened the shutters, let the sun burn out the rot, swept the corners, killed 2 spiders, found an old kettle rusted through at the bottom. The boy sat on the floor, back to the wall, knees drawn up. His eyes followed Caleb's every movement, but he didn't speak. Caleb didn't press him. That night, the stove coughed out heat, and the stars bled through the cracked ceiling. Caleb ate cold beans from a tin and handed half to the boy. He didn't eat, but he held the spoon. "Name's Nathaniel," Caleb said after a while, voice low. "That's what she called you. I'll call you that too." The boy blinked once, slow, then lowered his eyes. Caleb pulled off his boots and lay on the floor. It was the first time in many nights he didn't dream of gunfire or screams, only wind, rolling soft across an open plain. The next morning, when he rose with the sun, the boy was still awake, still watching, still there. The boy followed him without being asked. Out past the line shack, the land folded into shallow gullies and brush-choked arroyos, where the soil cracked open like an old scar. Caleb led the way with a shovel slung over one shoulder and a coil of fence wire in his other hand. The boy Nathaniel carried a dented tin pail that banged against his thigh with each step. He never asked where they were going. Caleb wouldn't have answered even if he had. The job was simple. Mend the line. 3 miles of busted fence between him and the desert, where wild mustangs roamed and coyotes stole sleep. The posts had rotted, the wire rusted through. It had once marked a boundary for cattle that no longer grazed, and no one cared if it held or not except Caleb. It gave the boy something to walk beside, and it gave Caleb a reason to keep breathing. They worked in silence. Sweat streaked the dirt on Caleb's face as he dug post holes with calloused hands, knuckles flayed raw from old rope and frostbit winters. Nathaniel handed him tools without being told. When a nail slipped, the boy retrieved it. When wire coiled too tight, he held it steady. Caleb noticed, but said nothing. By the second post, Nathaniel's palms had blistered. By the fourth, his pail had filled with rust flakes and bent nails. By the 6th, he was limping. Still, he said nothing. At noon, they sat under a sunburnt mesquite, and shared a dry biscuit, crumbling it between fingers and lips too parched to speak. Caleb passed him a canteen, and Nathaniel drank like it was the first water he'd tasted in days. Maybe it was. Caleb watched the horizon, eyes narrowed against the sun. He saw shapes in the distant smoke, maybe, or riders, but he didn't move. Just sipped once, then corked the canteen and passed it back. "You stay close," he said. "Out here, distance'll kill you before a bullet will." Nathaniel didn't nod, but Caleb saw the understanding in his face. That look, old for a child, too old. That evening, when they returned to the shack, they found a folded note nailed to the door with a knife. No name, no signature, just 5 words. "You're not welcome here anymore." Caleb pulled it down without a word, tucked it into his coat pocket. The boy looked up at him, waiting for something, a sign of anger, fear, anything. Caleb only said, "Good," and opened the door. They slept that night with the wind howling harder. A storm was coming. He could feel it in his bones, the way old soldiers do. The stove spat and hissed, but the shack stayed cold. Nathaniel curled up on the floor under Caleb's coat, eyes fluttering closed before his breath even slowed. Caleb sat up long after, staring at the knife mark in the doorframe. He'd seen hatred before, in camps, in towns, in the mirror, but there was something different about this kind. This kind waited, lurking like a snake beneath tall grass. The next morning, the boy was gone. Caleb sprang to his feet, heart thudding like war drums. He flung open the door, bare feet hitting cold dirt, eyes scanning the ridge. Caleb ran. That evening, when they returned to the shack, they found a folded note nailed to the door with a knife. No name, no signature, just 5 words. "You're not welcome here anymore." When he reached him, breath ragged and sharp in his lungs, he grabbed the boy's shoulders. "What are you doing out here?" Nathaniel pointed to a half-buried wooden cross, warped and sun-bleached. No name, no dates, just a marker. "She's here," he whispered. "Mama." Caleb's jaw tightened. He knelt beside the grave, picked up a stone and placed it on the cross's base. Nathaniel did the same. The hawk cried once, then vanished. Back at the shack, Caleb didn't ask why the boy had gone alone. Some things didn't need explaining. The rain came hard that night. Thunder rolled low across the plains, not violent, but steady like hooves pounding in the dark, like memory. The shack creaked under the weight of wind, and water slipped through the seams in the roof, falling in slow drops onto the dirt floor. Caleb placed an old pot beneath the worst leak. Nathaniel slept, but fitfully, his small frame twitching beneath the blanket Caleb had wrapped around him. By morning the air was washed clean, and the world smelled of wet earth and mesquite. Caleb stepped outside barefoot, letting the mud cling to his soles, grounding him in a way he hadn't felt in years. The boy joined him, silent as always, and together they watched the clouds break over the mountains, gold spilling between them like melted metal. It was the first morning Nathaniel reached for Caleb's hand, not with fear, with trust. They spent the next week rebuilding. Caleb scavenged wood from old barns, wire from the broken pens behind the feed store. They repaired the fence line one post at a time. Nathaniel learned how to twist wire tight, how to drive a nail clean, how to find north by watching the moss on trees. He didn't speak much, but he listened, and Caleb found himself talking, not stories, but small things. How his father once dug a well by hand. How the stars looked in Wyoming in winter. How silence could be a kind of prayer. One afternoon, they came across a fawn caught in the wire, its leg twisted in rust. It screamed when they approached, wild and shrill. Nathaniel flinched but didn't step back. Caleb knelt beside the creature, hands steady. "Gotta cut the wire." The boy handed him the pliers. It took time. The fawn kicked, tore Caleb's forearm open with its hooves. Blood spilled quick, but he didn't stop. Eventually, the wire gave. The fawn bolted, stumbling into the brush, one leg dragging behind. But it lived. Back at the shack, Nathaniel washed Caleb's wound with rainwater and wrapped it with a strip torn from an old shirt. His hands were small but careful, focused. When he was done, Caleb touched the boy's shoulder. "You did good today." Nathaniel looked up. His eyes were darker than night, but soft. "You didn't let it die." "No," Caleb said, "didn't seem right." Neither spoke after that. They didn't need to, but the world beyond their line of fence hadn't gone quiet. "You did good today." Back at the shack, Nathaniel asked, "Why do they hate me?" The question hung between them like smoke. "No," Caleb said, "didn't seem right." Nathaniel didn't cry. He never did. "You did good today. Will you leave?" he asked. Caleb shook his head. Not a chance. The days stretched longer. Summer deepened. They built a chicken coop from broken crates. Caleb taught Nathaniel how to ride bareback, how to track mule deer by their droppings, how to read the sky for coming storms. They were becoming something more than survival, less than peace, but something strong, something stitched from shared work and hard silences. Then one morning, a letter came, carried by a boy from town, too nervous to meet Caleb's eye. He handed it over and rode off without a word. The seal bore the mark of the territorial office. The days stretched longer. Summer deepened. They built a chicken coop from broken crates. Caleb taught Nathaniel how to ride bareback, how to track mule deer by their droppings, how to read the sky for coming storms. "The boy is not yours. Return him by month's end, or face legal consequence." Caleb read it once, then again, then burned it in the stove. Nathaniel watched it curl to ash. Neither of them spoke, but the silence this time felt different, like something was ending. The morning after the letter burned, Caleb saddled the bay gelding before dawn. The moon still clung to the edge of the sky, pale and unwilling to let go. He packed a rifle, jerky, a bedroll, and the last of the coin he'd hidden beneath a floorboard. Nathaniel watched from the doorway, arms crossed, bare feet dusted in ash. "You're leaving," he said. It wasn't a question. Caleb tightened the cinch on the saddle and turned. "I'm going to town. Gonna talk to someone who owes me a favor." Nathaniel's eyes didn't waver. "They won't help." Caleb didn't answer right away. He pulled the rifle from the rack and checked the chamber. Then he stepped forward, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "They might, and if they don't, I'll find someone who will." Nathaniel looked down, then nodded once. Not with hope, but with something close to resolve. Caleb left him with a knife, a flint, and a warning. "If I'm not back by tomorrow night, take the trail west. Follow the creek until it forks. Stay low, stay quiet." Nathaniel said nothing. Caleb rode into town under a blood-orange sky, dust rising like smoke behind him. At the courthouse, he tied the gelding to a post, nodded to the clerk, and stepped inside. Marshal Garvey sat behind the desk, coat off, suspenders stretched over his belly like he'd swallowed a keg, his eyes lifted slow. "Heard you got my letter." Caleb didn't sit. "The boy stays with me." Nathaniel said nothing. Caleb rode into town under a blood-orange sky, dust rising like smoke behind him. At the courthouse, he tied the gelding to a post, nodded to the clerk, and stepped inside. Garvey leaned back, laced his fingers over his stomach. "Ain't up to you. Territory laws don't see color, but they see blood, and you ain't kin." Caleb's jaw worked. "He's got a name, a home. He's mine." Garvey leaned back, laced his fingers over his stomach. "Ain't up to you. Territory laws don't see color, but they see blood, and you ain't kin." Caleb stepped forward. Not fast, not threatening. Just near enough the marshal sat up straight. "I bled for this land. I've buried brothers in this dirt. I ain't going anywhere. You're a relic, Rourke, and that boy, he's a stain on your story." For a moment, neither man breathed. Then Caleb said, quiet and sharp, "He's the only part of my story worth telling." Garvey stood, fists clenched. "You got until the end of the week. Then I send men." Caleb turned and walked out without another word. By the time he reached the shack, the sun was down. But Nathaniel was gone. The door hung open, swinging in the wind. The bedroll was missing. So was the knife. A trail of small footprints led away, shallow in the drying mud, bending west. Panic surged, cold and sharp. Caleb mounted fast, following the tracks across the flats, into the hills. He found the boy at the edge of the canyon, huddled beneath a cedar, watching the stars blink awake. Nathaniel didn't look surprised, just said, "Didn't want you to get in trouble." Caleb dismounted, sat beside him in the dust. The door hung open, swinging in the wind. The bedroll was missing. So was the knife. Nathaniel looked at him. "Then why do they hate me?" Caleb took a breath, let it out slow. "Because you're proof the world ain't as simple as they want it to be. and people hate being wrong more than anything. They sat together under the sky, the wind whispering through the rocks. "I'm scared," the boy said. Caleb placed a hand on his back. "So am I." Neither moved. The stars wheeled above like ancient eyes, silent and watching. The next days passed like grit through a sieve, slow, rough, unavoidable. Caleb fortified the shack, repaired the hinges on the door, reinforced the shutters with broken planks scavenged from an old cattle shed. He sharpened every blade in the house, loaded cartridges with a soldier's precision, and stashed them in corners where Nathaniel wouldn't think to look. It wasn't about fear. It was about time, and how little of it they had left. Nathaniel still woke before him. He collected eggs from the hens, fetched water from the creek, watched the road in a way no child should. He didn't ask what the end of the week meant. He already knew. On the fourth morning, Caleb rode to the edge of town again, not to plead, not to threaten, but to see. The church bell rang at noon. Men stood outside the saloon with their thumbs hooked in their belts, spitting and muttering. The mayor's boy, the one who once rode past and threw rocks at Nathaniel, now stood beside Marshal Garvey's men, rifle slung across his back like a badge of birthright. They weren't hiding it anymore. Caleb rode back slow, his jaw locked tight, every muscle wound for war. But when he reached the shack, Nathaniel wasn't waiting. Instead, he found a letter nailed to the door, written in a child's uneven hand. "Don't fight for me. Not if it means losing yourself." No signature, no trail. The boy was gone. Caleb didn't think. He saddled the gelding, packed only water and salt jerky, and rode straight west. The air was dry enough to strip bark from trees, but the wind carried traces of movement, broken branches, boot prints half blown by sand, a single red thread caught on a thorn bush. Nathaniel had taken the trail Caleb once told him about, the one along the creek bed, through the pass where wild javelina rooted in the brush and hawks cried from the cliffs. The boy was smart, careful, but he was still just a boy. Caleb found him near dusk, crouched beneath a bluff, his coat drawn up around his knees. His eyes flicked toward Caleb, wide and wet, but he didn't move. Caleb dismounted and sat beside him, said nothing for a long time. Then, "You don't get to decide what I give up." Nathaniel blinked. "But they'll take me." Caleb's voice came out low. "They'll try." The boy shook his head. "They always win." Caleb looked out over the canyon, where the sky flamed purple and copper, like bruises healing in the dark. "Not always." "They're coming," Nathaniel said. "I know. Will you kill them?" Caleb didn't answer right away. Then, "Only if they try to take what's mine." The boy's lip trembled, but he didn't cry. Instead, he leaned into Caleb's side and whispered, "I don't want to run anymore." "You won't." That night, they didn't return to the shack. They camped out beneath the stars, under the same cottonwoods where the boy's mother had once built fires with stones and cooked beans in a battered tin pot. Caleb told him stories, not all of them true, but most of them honest. Stories of the war, of a horse that once saved his life, of a brother who died with Caleb's name on his lips. Nathaniel listened without speaking, until his breath slowed and sleep took him. And when Caleb closed his eyes, for the first time in years, he dreamed of a home that didn't burn. At sunrise, they rode back together. The wind had shifted. The air was tighter somehow, like the land itself braced for what was coming. They moved quiet across the flats, the horses' hooves muffled in the dust. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to guess. Smoke curled above the shack when they reached it, thin, controlled, not fire, but coffee. Caleb dismounted first, rifle slung, eyes scanning the ridge and brush line. Nathaniel slid down beside him, his face unreadable, half-shadowed by the brim of his borrowed hat. A voice called out from behind the coop, "You're late." Caleb stepped forward, the rifle still low but ready. Eloise Baird emerged from the shade, sleeves rolled, apron streaked with flour and blood chicken, not human. Her shotgun rested on her hip like it belonged there. Behind her stood two ranch hands Caleb hadn't seen in years, both scarred, both quiet. Caleb frowned. "Didn't think anyone come." Eloise shrugged. "Didn't come for you, came for the boy." Nathaniel moved beside Caleb, uncertain. Eloise looked down at him and said simply, "You remind me of my brother. He died before you were born. Shot through the back at Sand Creek. Just a kid. Wore a necklace made of crow feathers. I still dream about the sound he made when he fell." Caleb swallowed hard. Eloise reached into her apron, pulled out a tin badge, and tossed it at Caleb's feet. "Town won't fight for you, but some of us ain't forgotten who you are." She nodded once, then turned, leaving the shotgun leaning by the door. By nightfall, a dozen more had come, not with flags or declarations, just grit in their boots and quiet on their tongues. Some brought supplies. One brought dynamite. Another brought nothing but a hammer and an old scar across his cheek. They didn't ask who the boy was. They didn't need to. They saw the way he stood beside Caleb, chin up, hands clenched, waiting to face what came. On the last day, the sun never broke through. Clouds hung thick. The road from town stayed empty until near dusk, when a thin line of riders appeared in the distance, 6 in total. Marshal Garvey at the front, rifle slung, a red band tied around his arm. Caleb stood in front of the shack, boots planted, Nathaniel beside him. Behind them, the others waited in the brush, guns hidden but ready. Garvey reined in, 10 paces away. "This your last stand, Rourke?" Caleb didn't flinch. "Just another day. You know the law." "I know what's right." Garvey's horse snorted. The marshal spat. "You think you'll win this? You think the territory gives a damn about a washed-up scout and a half-blood kid?" Caleb raised his voice, calm as stone. "You make one move toward him, you'll lose more than just this day." Garvey looked past him, finally seeing the figures in the brush, the glint of steel, the quiet strength. Something in his face changed, not fear, just calculation. He tugged his reins. "This ain't over," he muttered. "The law don't forget." Caleb's eyes were hard. "Neither do we." Garvey turned. The others followed. The dust swallowed them up. When the sound of hooves had faded, no one spoke. The wind carried a hush like a prayer, or maybe a warning. Nathaniel looked up at Caleb. "They'll come back." Caleb nodded. "Maybe. Then what do we do?" Caleb placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "We build." He meant more than fences. That night, the shack no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt like a beginning, the kind built plank by plank, word by word, bond by bond. The others left by morning, quietly, like ghosts who had done their part. Caleb took Nathaniel's hand and placed a carved wooden ring in his palm, a thing made of oak, once part of his father's rifle stock. "My pa gave this to me when I turned 13, said it meant something. Now it's yours." Nathaniel clutched it tight. Caleb smiled, slow. "We ain't blood, but we're family." The boy nodded. In the distance, a hawk wheeled. The sun broke the cloud line. The coop clucked with life, and the sound of a hammer rang out, steady, shaping wood into home. By midsummer, the shack had transformed. The walls stood straighter now, with fresh pine boards lining the sides. A porch ran along the front, shaded by canvas stretched taut between cedar poles. Smoke curled lazily from the stovepipe each morning. The coop bustled with hens, and one ornery rooster Nathaniel had named Thistle. A small garden grew behind the house: onions, squash, beans, all coaxed from dry earth with stubborn care. Nathaniel watered it each day before sunrise, barefoot in the dust, lips moving silently as he walked the rows. Caleb never asked what he was saying. Some things were sacred. They lived quiet, but not alone. Town didn't change overnight, some never would, but folks nodded now, not all, but enough. Eloise came by each week with flour or jam and sat on the porch like she'd always belonged. One of the ranch hands left a new hoe by the door, wrapped in burlap and twine. A girl from the schoolhouse brought books. And though Nathaniel didn't speak much, he listened when Caleb read aloud at night, eyes tracking every word like it might save him. Caleb still kept his rifle near, cleaned it every Sunday, loaded it fresh, not out of fear, just readiness. There were always men like Garvey, some with law behind them, some without, but none had returned. Nathaniel had begun carving a habit that started with a pocket knife and a branch, and now filled the shack with small figures. A hawk, a stallion, a woman with hair carved like wind. Caleb recognized her without asking. One evening, after supper, Nathaniel handed him a new carving. It was a house, simple, square, but solid, smoke from the chimney. A tiny boy carved into the front step, holding a man's hand. Caleb turned it over in his palm. Words were etched beneath, crude but clear. "This is ours." Caleb looked at the boy, throat thick. He didn't speak, just placed the carving on the mantel and left it there. That fall, the rains returned, soft and steady. The creek swelled, and green crept back into the hills. Nathaniel's laughter came easier, not often, but enough to make the silence feel less like grief. He sang sometimes. Low chants he must have heard from his mother. Caleb never asked what they meant, just listened. Let the rhythm settle into the bones of the place. On the boy's 9th birthday, Caleb took him to the canyon where they'd once buried the past. They built a cairn together, stone by stone, then sat in the quiet. Caleb reached into his coat and handed Nathaniel a folded paper. The boy opened it, brows furrowed. It was a deed, land, legally transferred, in Nathaniel's name. "Found a lawyer in Santa Fe," Caleb said, voice rough. "Took a while, took everything I had." Nathaniel's hands trembled. "Why?" "Because they won't take it from you now. Not ever." The boy nodded, folded the paper back with reverence. Later, as they rode home, Caleb watched him in the saddle ahead, the wind tugging at his coat, his back straight. The boy was not who he'd been. Neither was Caleb. At night, they built a fire and sat shoulder to shoulder. Nathaniel asked, "Do you think I'll ever forget her face?" Caleb poked the fire once. "No, and you shouldn't." The boy nodded slowly. "But it doesn't hurt the same anymore." "That's called healing," Caleb said. A long silence. Then Nathaniel leaned his head on Caleb's shoulder. The stars blinked into view, slow and certain. From the porch of the shack, the world seemed wide and possible again. Behind them was pain. Yes, but ahead was the harvest, the promise of spring, and something stronger than blood. Family. Not by accident, by choice.